Distinguished guests, colleagues, education advocates, and World Bank staff. We are in this room today because we care about improving access to and quality of basic education worldwide and have indeed devoted our lives to doing so. The World Bank is the largest external funder of basic education in the world. This by itself merits our praise and our heightened attention to its work. The World Bank continues to take great strides in supporting basic education. Last year, the International Development Association, or IDA, the bank's fund for the poorest, had a record high year for basic education, supplying new commitments worth $1.5 billion. As basic education lending volumes like these commendably become more common, some issues remain that the bank continues to seek to resolve. Education support to Africa and GPE countries in particular is among them. Less than a fifth of last year's IDA lending for basic education went to GPE countries. 3/4 or $1.1 billion of this $1.5 billion last year went to 3 countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, while only $98 million or 7% went to Africa. While it was a record high year for IDA support to basic education as a whole, that for Africa had not been that low since 1997. The bank is trying to correct this course as it is anticipating to commit $600 million to Africa in 2013. Nevertheless, this $600 million will only reach 5 of 39 IDA countries in the region. It is because of these issues such as these that the World Bank made its pledge to basic education in 2010. Many of you are no doubt familiar with this pledge. Since its declaration in 2010, it has been recommitted to at several high-level meetings. Most recently, the new World Bank president, Dr. Jim Yong Kim, expressed this commitment 2 weeks ago at the launch of the UN Secretary General's new education initiative, Education First, that was part of the UN General Assembly in New York. Remarked Dr. Kim, we are well on our way toward meeting the pledge we made at the 2010 MDG Summit to increase IDA financing for basic education by an additional $750 million by 2015 to help the countries furthest from the MDGs. I am very proud to stand by this commitment. But what exactly is this pledge? The pledge, as announced in September of 2010 at the UN Millennium Development Goals Summit in New York, was initially announced by former World Bank President Robert Zoellick and then Senior Managing Director Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. In the words of Ms. Okonjo-Iweala, "Today I am proud to announce that the bank's International Development Association, IDA, our fund for the poorest, will increase grants and zero-interest loans for basic education by an additional $750 million over the next 5 years to 2015. This represents about a 40% increase in our basic education lending over the past 5 years for the poorest countries. These additional resources will be targeted toward countries that are off track to reach the education MDGs by 2015, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In order to yield the highest impact, the bank will seek to leverage these additional IDA funds to support low-income countries that receive financing from the Education for All Fast Track initiative, which is now known as the Global Partnership for Education." As can be seen, the pledge was speaking directly to some of the key difficulties in World Bank education financing, the particular lack of IDA support to basic education in Africa and South Asia, as well as GPE countries. The declaration of the upcoming 40% increase in World Bank investment to basic education was enthusiastically welcomed and garnered media coverage worldwide. It was reported by the Associated Press and subsequently printed in media outlets worldwide. The GPE also issued a press release documenting this future 40% increase. Results joined in the celebration and praised the World Bank for its bold commitment in our fall-winter 2010 newsletter to our nationwide network of volunteers and advocates. Despite this commitment and anticipation, IDA's support to basic education in the first year of the pledge, 2011, was the lowest in nearly a decade. Not too long afterwards, Result and education advocates worldwide learned that the World Bank's pledge would amount to far less than anticipated. The value of the pledge has come to hinge on its annual baseline. The annual baseline refers to the amount of money to be provided annually before any part of the additional $750 million. So X amount of money plus an additional $750 million over 5 years. The World Bank was and still is today using an annual baseline of $742 million. Where did this number come from? $742 million is the 11-year average of IDA support to basic education from 2000 to 2010. Due to the relatively much lower lending levels in the early 2000s, the 11-year average baseline results in a very low target on which to benchmark progress. For example, IDA lending to basic education had been consistently above $742 million for the 4 years prior to the pledge. Such a low baseline makes the pledge extremely weak, and upon learning of it, Results, education coalitions, and other civil society organizations immediately began dialogues with the World Bank in attempts to restore the pledge to something of more appropriate value. How low is this 11-year baseline, and what does this mean for the pledge? An annual baseline of $742 million over the 5-year period, plus the additional $750 million as pledged, means that the pledge aims to support basic education with an average annual amount of $892 million, making the total pledge amount to $4.5 billion over 5 years. As can be seen, this amount is so low that the World Bank could decrease support to basic education while claiming pledge success. In fact, even if investments in basic education were to be cut by $100 million every year starting at 2010, a total of $4.5 billion would still be achieved and thus still meet the pledge. Compare that total to the previous 5 years. From 2006 to 2010, IDA support to basic education totaled $4.9 billion. Now this pledge to increase IDA support to basic education aims to total $4.5 billion from 2011 to 2015. $4.9 billion from 2006 to 2010, $4.5 billion from 2011 to 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not an increase. This is a decrease. $4.5 billion is less than $4.9 billion. The current baseline is so low that it has actually turned a pledge to increase support into a pledge to decrease it. If you recall, the pledge was to represent a 40% increase to IDA support to basic education. Now it is a 9% decrease. We don't understand why such a pledge would be made, and we don't understand how this can be considered, quote, accelerating progress toward the education MDGs, unquote, as advertised on the World Bank's pledge tracking website. If the World Bank wants to meet this 40% increase, and thereby truly accelerate progress toward the education MDGs, it would need to provide $6.8 billion from 2011 to 2015. This would mean an average of about $1.35 billion per year, or an annual baseline of about $1.2 billion. As can be seen, coincidentally, $1.2 billion happened to be the IDA basic education lending volume for 2010, the year the pledge was made. This coincidence suggests that the single year of 2010 was the original baseline of the pledge, not the 11-year average of 2000 to 2010. In other words, it would mean that IDA would continue to commit $1.2 billion to basic education as it had in 2010, extend that level of support out 5 years, and ramp it up by an additional $750 million. This makes sense with the typical understanding of a pledge, that a promise is being made to do something based on what is happening right now. The differences between what seemed to be the original baseline and the current baseline can be likened to getting a raise at work. If your boss comes in and tells you today that you're getting a raise, it means an increase to what your salary is right now, this year. Now imagine your boss comes back and says that actually the raise won't be based on this year's salary, but on the average of your salary over the last 11 years. Considering what you were being paid 11 years ago, you can easily see how a raise could actually be a pay cut to your salary if your salary is simultaneously decreased to what it was years ago. The numbers suggest that this is what has happened to the World Bank's pledge to basic education. Even though the math undeniably demonstrates that the baseline of the pledge would necessarily have to be $1.2 billion, or the lending level of 2010, it has been said that there would have been no way that the pledge would have been based on 2010, as it was an extremely high, unrepresentative year. While this is true of 2009, it is not true of 2010. 2010 is almost exactly in line with the trend education lending had been experiencing previously from 2005 to 2008. One of these scenarios represents a 40% increase in basic education lending. One of them does not. The one that is a 9% increase is the one that the World Bank insists is the meaning of the 2010 pledge. My friends, we are all part of the same team, with the same mission to improve education worldwide. Relationships among us run deep, and we are strongly allied to one another. Though it may at times be difficult and even unpleasant, we nevertheless have an obligation to each other to keep one another on the right path. The refusal to acknowledge the difference between an increase and a decrease, up from down, is unacceptable. And none of us here will ever see the educational progress we also desperately seek if we start calling decelerated support accelerated support. Results has produced a new report on this, and the issue has begun to appear in newspapers in the United States. We are requesting that IDA invest $6.8 billion in basic education from 2011 to 2015. This request is within the reach of the bank. IDA committed $1.5 billion to basic education last year. If it commits $1.6 billion annually from now until 2015, it would achieve this $6.8 billion and meet a pledge that actually represents an increase in support. At a time at which the international community is beginning to rally support to basic education with new initiatives such as the UN Secretary General's Education First, and global efforts are being increased to make final strides in achieving the MDGs by 2015, we look up to the World Bank more than ever as a leader in education development. As the bank continues to move forward with its commendable zeal for the advancement of education worldwide, let the integrity of the pledge be a reflection of that enthusiasm and dedication. It is time that the pledge is clarified to commit a total of $6.8 billion from 2011 to 2015, so as to genuinely accelerate progress towards the education MDGs. Thank you.